Dying Healthy by Nicholas Rivers. Chapter 1. Is it really that serious, Dr. Clark? The man sitting on the exam table with his shirt open to just above his navel asked. The man's blond hair was closely cropped and meticulously combed backwards from his forehead. I'm afraid it is, Steve. If we don't get your numbers down over the next few months, your risk of dying from a heart attack or stroke will triple. It's the fast food. I'm sure of it. 10 years ago, it was an occasional treat. Now it's become a daily ritual. It's just so damn convenient, Steve Jensen said. Dr. Clark stood in front of him holding a clipboard and wearing a knee-length white coat over a pair of blue hospital scrubs. A black stethoscope was draped across the doctor's shoulders. Don't be too hard on yourself, Steve. Recent studies indicate that genetics may be just as important as diet in determining our cholesterol levels. You're young, so there's still plenty of time to act. What exactly do you recommend I do, Dr. Clark? Steve asked. Start with your diet. Cut out red meat, butter, and of course, fast food. Focus on freshly prepared meals. Cut out the processed stuff. The fiber in plants can bind to cholesterol and prevent its absorption. Exercise for around 30 minutes, at least 3 times per week. Find productive ways to cope with stress. Don't smoke. Don't drink. And most importantly, Steve, try to do at least one thing you love every day. What if you love smoking and drinking? Steve asked, grinning. That's a long list, Doc. The exercise part I think I can do. I don't smoke. Don't really drink either. I don't have time to. The diet and stress part, however, will be harder, Steve said. Why is that, Steve? Work, Doc. I'm always on the job. I feel like I'm always on the move. I suppose you know what that's like. I do, but we all need to maintain boundaries, Steve. What do you do for a living? I run my own business. Is it a large one? Are you responsible for a lot of people? I guess you can say that. SMW is currently the world's biggest manufacturer of ball bearings. Just about every car, truck, airplane, and boat made over the last decade has SMW bearings somewhere inside it. Impressive. What does SMW stand for, Steve? Snyder Machine Works. It's named after my grandfather, Ben Snyder. Did he start the company? No, not technically. But without his help, there would be no SMW. That's for sure. Why is that? Well, Doc, 30 years ago, when I was an 18-year-old high school dropout working in my grandfather's garage, I had a dream that changed my life. That week, we'd been salvaging parts from a wrecked semi-truck. I helped my grandfather take apart one of the wheels and recover the brake calipers. In the middle of getting the last caliper off, he pulls one of the dinner plate-sized bearings out of the hub and breaks the thing apart to show me the balls inside. I can see him clanking them together now in his hands, as if it happened yesterday. He explained to me how the balls reduced friction, allowing the wheel to spin more freely. I'll never forget what he told me. Friction is the thing that slows us down, Stevie. Friction takes the energy an engine is trying to translate into forward motion and redirects it away from that purpose, Grandpa had said, standing in front of the gutted truck. He was always teaching me hands-on lessons when we worked. I learned more from him than from all my school teachers combined. Anyway, that night I dreamt I was standing alone in a dark room. The only source of light was a lamp hanging over a black wooden table at the center of the room. The light shone down on the rough, unsanded wood of the table in a discreet cone, just like you see in the interrogation room of the police stations during movies. But there was no suspect in this room. The only thing on the table was a silver circle, and as I approached, I could see it was a bearing, much like the one my grandfather had shown me the previous day. Only in my dream, I didn't need to break the bearing open to see the silver balls inside. I could see through the outer casing somehow. I saw the balls turning in place like my grandfather had described they would while the wheel was spinning. Around each of the balls, I could see wavy lines, sort of like the kind you see over hot asphalt in the summer. I hadn't taken physics or any math beyond algebra at that point in my life, but I realized that the lines represented the friction my grandfather had been talking about. Then, before my eyes, the conformation of the bearing's outer shell began to change, ever so slightly. I watched as a small inward divot formed in the casing all the way around its inner and outer circumferences, like someone pressing a shallow groove with a ballpoint pen around a glazed donut. Now the spinning balls, instead of contacting the entire surface of the outer casing, were touching just the point of that raised groove. The balls kept spinning inside the newly shaped bearing, but the wavy lines disappeared. The friction was gone. When I woke up, I sketched out what I had seen in the dream and took it to my grandfather. He eventually mortgaged his business to help me manufacture, market, and distribute the first prototype of what is now known as the SMW bearing. We were able to cut friction by 50% compared to the best bearings on the market at the time. Now, SMW bearings are the industry standard. They're in just about everything that has spinning parts, from skateboards to freight trains. I'm just thankful my grandfather got to see SMW become successful before he died. That's an inspiring story, Steve. My grandfather had high cholesterol too. He died from a heart attack, just like my father. That's why I'm going to try to do everything you recommend, Doctor. That's good you're being proactive, Steve. Let's recheck your levels in 3 months. If things haven't improved, we'll have to talk about starting a statin. Dr. Clark started toward the door. As he put his hand upon the knob, Steve said, "One more question, Doc." "Of course, Steve. What is it?" Dr. Clark said, turning back toward him. "Didn't you say the arteries bringing blood to my heart are like pipes, and that the cholesterol was like gunk building up on the inside of those pipes?" "You're exactly right, Steve." "Well, Doc, I'm an engineer at heart. I like numbers. Is there a way to see just how clogged my pipes really are?" "There is. Cardiology can do testing to see how much plaque is in your arteries. It would be expensive because insurance usually won't cover it for someone like yourself who is asymptomatic." "I'll pay, Doc. Health is worth more than gold." That's something else my grandpa would always say. "I'll send over a referral in the morning, Steve. You should hear from cardiology by next week," Dr. Clark said. "Thanks, Doc. If my arteries look clear, I'm buying both you and me a year's supply of filet mignon." "Thanks, Steve, but I'm a pescatarian." Chapter 2. After leaving Dr. Clark's office, Steve sat in his parked car looking westward, away from the complex of buildings. Through the front windshield of the gleaming dark blue restored 1957 Cadillac DeVille, Steve looked up at the mat of gray clouds covering the sky above him. He slipped his right hand into his jacket and underneath his shirt. His palm was cold and clammy against the dry warmth of his chest. He felt the familiar reverberation and jerked his hand away quickly, as if the act of perseverating upon his heart's beating might make the object of his mental scrutiny more likely to falter in its function. Steve felt a lump forming within his throat. He swallowed hard and picked up the insulated thermos he normally kept full of black coffee. Only when the cup was against his lips did he realize it was empty. A single drop of cold coffee fell onto his parched tongue and only seemed to make things worse. He coughed to clear his throat, but the lump seemed to grow larger. He tried to take a deep breath and fill his lungs, but he found it difficult, like something was sitting on his chest. A sound like rushing rapids filled his ears, and his field of vision narrowed. The steering wheel that his hands were resting on seemed like it was on the other end of a lengthening dark tunnel now, receding further by the minute. Then Steve heard a voice, soft but clear, echoing in his mind. "Every time a wave of panic comes over you, Steve, don't fight it. Picture unbroken, new-fallen snow. Picture a calm body of water, any body of water. It doesn't matter. Look for ripples in its surface and smooth them out like you would wrinkles in the sheets on a newly made bed." The lake Steve now saw in his mind's eye was one down the road from his boyhood home. It was surrounded by a carpet of green conifers intermingled with bright yellow patches of aspen on a shelf of land 3,000 feet below the tree line. And now he could clearly hear the lapping of the water on the lake's wooded shore. He saw the small waves skirting across its surface. Try to make the waves disappear, Rinka had said. He kept the lake in his mind's eye and focused on the water. Slowly the waves relented, and the sound of the water slapping on the bank faded away. Steve opened his eyes, relieved to see the black rubber steering wheel directly in front of him again. He felt calm, and the lump in his throat was gone. He looked around the parking lot self consciously, but no one had seen him. Even if someone had been watching, they wouldn't have been able to notice anything amiss from outside the car. The whole episode had taken place within 30 seconds, though in Steve's mind it seemed like forever. Steve took another deep breath and started the engine of his Cadillac. When Steve arrived home and opened his front door, he paused and looked at the woman lying on his living room couch. She was sleeping with her face buried in the crook of one folded arm. Elise was the first woman Steve had ever truly fallen in love with. They had been introduced to each other at a party by a mutual friend, and their bond had been almost instantaneous. As he closed the door, Elise opened her eyes and looked up at him groggily. "Steve, what time is it?" she said, yawning. "It's just after 5. Sorry I woke you. I can never get this door to close quietly." "I can't believe I fell asleep. How did your doctor's appointment go?" Elise said, as she sat up and stretched her arms out above her head. "The whole thing's a setup, Elise," Steve said, locking the deadbolt on the front door before sitting down next to her on the couch. "What do you mean? What's a setup? How did your checkup go, Steve?" "It's all a setup, Elise," Steve repeated. "Stop playing around, Steve. What do you mean? Who set you up?" "God did, Elise. God set us all up." "You told me you were an atheist. What does God have to do with your checkup? Was everything okay?" "My cholesterol's off the chart. The doctor read off a list of the foods he wants me to stop eating. He should have just asked me to write down everything I loved. How can it be that the better something tastes, the worse it is for me? It's just too unlikely to be coincidental, Elise. It's got to be a setup." Elise let out a sigh of relief. "Is that all, Steve?" "It's biology that sets you up. Salts, sugars, fats were all rare finds in the caveman days. Our taste buds have evolved to home in on those things. Now, thanks to science and technology, you're never more than a click away from a limitless supply of calories. Our bodies haven't had time to adapt, so we have to use willpower. The real question is, are you ready to make the change the doctor recommended?" "I'm on it, Elise. I've already requested an appointment with a cardiologist." "Good. I'm glad you're not blowing this off. I'm going to throw out some of the junk in the pantry. We'll do this together. Who knows? You might even start to like eating healthy once you realize how good it makes you feel." "Can we have steak tonight, Elise? One last time?" "Sure, Steve. But I'm donating that box of frozen meat to the shelter tomorrow." "The filet mignon?" "Let's not act so quickly, Elise. Dr. Clark said the cardiologist has a test that can tell me how bad my arteries already are. If things look good, I can still enjoy a steak every now and then." Chapter 3. The afternoon was warm, but not uncomfortably so. A northbound wind blew through the wide, shallow canyon. Tumbleweed rolled across the hillside below the reddish gold cliffs like slow, reluctant cattle on their way home from pasture. Steve and Elise sat shoulder to shoulder overlooking the fairway of hole number 18 at the Pine Canyon Golf Resort on the balcony of Steve's 12,000 square foot mansion. It had been 2 weeks since his cardiology appointment, and Steve still hadn't gotten a message from the doctor about his results. Saguaro cacti covered the rocky slope leading down to the edge of the fairway. Many of the cacti were pockmarked by small craters that reminded Steve of the nodulous cystic acne he had battled as a teenager. At the center of each of these indentations on the cacti were primarily white, but occasionally yellow, green, and even more rarely pink, orange, or red golf balls. The density of wounded cacti increased with proximity to the tee box at the north end of the canyon, as did the severity of their wounds. From their vantage on the balcony, Steve and Elise could see a lone golfer at the tee box getting ready to drive the ball. That was one of the best steaks you ever made, Steve, Elise said as she put her fork down. I figured it might be my last. I better make it count. That treadmill they had me on at the cardiologist's office really took the wind out of me. I'm not expecting good news, Elise. It makes me nervous that I still haven't heard anything from their office. Do you think that means something's wrong? Steve asked. A plane was flying overhead, and the sound of its engines echoed through the canyon. No, Steve. I think it just means there's a lot of heart disease out there, so the cardiologist is busy. If they saw something bad, they probably would have called you right away, she said, not looking at Steve, but up at the plane which had dipped low toward the canyon. Remember the turbulence we hit when we were landing in Maui? I never felt so out of control in my life, Elise said, her eyes following the plane as it left a white contrail in the cloudless blue sky. How could I forget? I ended up wearing my dinner, Steve said. You're lucky. I almost choked on mine. The next day, I swore I could still feel a piece of the burger I'd been eating stuck in my throat. I really thought we were going down for a minute. The crazy thing is that a drop of just a few dozen feet feels cataclysmic for the passengers on the plane, but watching from down here, you probably wouldn't even have noticed. You're right. The people on that plane could be losing their lunches right now, but it looks like they're soaring serenely across the blue sky to us, Steve said. A guy was killed by turbulence just the other day, thrown right out of his seat and hit the ceiling. That's why I always keep my seatbelt on, no matter what the sign says, Elise said. Probably a wise choice, Elise. But what if you've had a few drinks and you have to pee? And that's what adult diapers are for, Steve. Ah, that's why you always seem so relaxed on the plane, Elise. Hey, what do you think about one more steak? Pan fried this time. Steve, you've eaten 5 steaks in the last 2 weeks. I thought the goal was to cut back your red meat consumption, not increase it. I'm just trying to make the most of the time I have before the cardiologist calls me with the bad news. Then I'll have to stop for good, Elise. I'm sure I can do it. Just one more steak, please, Steve said pleadingly. Chapter 4. The next day, the couple was sitting around their living room trying to decide what they would eat for dinner. I got a great recipe for crusted salmon from Cindy, Elise said. Something about fish has always grossed me out, Elise. I try not to eat it unless I have no other choice. That's just because you've never had it cooked right, Steve. I'm heading out to the store to get the ingredients. I'm sure you're going to love this, Elise said. She got up from the couch and grabbed her car keys off the hook by the front door. The moment Elise stepped outside, Steve went quickly over to the refrigerator in the kitchen and pulled out the lowermost freezer drawer. Cold, billowing plumes of condensate surrounded his arms as he lifted a bag of frozen corn up and removed a small piece of vacuum-sealed meat from beneath it. He'd hidden this forbidden delicacy when Elise had brought up the idea of giving his box of steaks away. Steve placed the package of meat on the counter and looked guiltily over his shoulder at the front door Elise had just gone out of. His phone rang, and he almost dropped the steak. He went over to the stove and turned on the flame before answering his phone. Hello? Hi, Steve. It's Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark, how are you? That was quite a workout your friends over in the cardiology office put me through last week, Steve said. Well, I got the report today, Steve, and everything looks great. I thought for sure with how high your cholesterol was, they would find a significant amount of atherosclerosis, but you've got the coronary arteries of an 18-year-old, Steve. That's great news, Doc. I'm still going to recommend you increase your fruit and vegetable intake and minimize your unhealthy cholesterol intake, Steve. I hear you loud and clear, Doc. My girlfriend's already filled the kitchen with vegetables I never even knew existed. I'm still trying to figure out why anyone would ever eat a grapefruit on purpose. I'm glad she's steering you in the right direction, Steve. My secretary will mail you a printed copy of the official report from cardiology, and we can follow up in around 6 months to recheck your labs. Steve hung up the phone and turned up the burner beneath the saucepan. On the counter was the fillet. Steve cut the vacuum sealed pouch and dropped the steak into the hot pan, pulling his hand back just in time to avoid being burned by the spattering oil. He added garlic, salt, pepper, and a teaspoon of butter to the saucepan. The familiar odors swept over him. Steve closed his eyes and inhaled deeply through his nose, savoring his momentary triumph for all it was worth. His heart was fine, and the steak smelled sumptuous. He felt his mouth begin to water, and then his phone began to ring again. "Marjorie, how have you been?" Steve said as he picked up the line. "Not good, Steve. Jennifer's in the hospital," a soft, quivering voice said on the other end. "I just saw her yesterday. What happened?" "I'm not sure. They said she just collapsed." "That's terrible, Marjorie. Is she at City Regional?" "Yes." "Okay, I'm on my way. I'll meet you in the hospital lobby." Steve turned off the burner and looked longingly at the steak, cooked on one side, still pink and raw on the other. Then he opened the trash can and slid the half-cooked meat off of the pan and into the garbage. Chapter 5. "So, you don't think I could have an aneurysm, Doc? My niece just died of one. She was one of the kindest souls I'd ever met. Young, beautiful, smart. She was in her prime. I saw her the day before she died, and she seemed fine," Steve said. He was back on the exam table in Dr. Clark's office. "I'm sorry to hear about your niece, Steve, but a stroke like that in someone your age with normal blood pressure would be very rare. There is imaging that can detect aneurysms, but those scans are generally only done if someone has clinical symptoms." "Why wait, Doc? What about tumors? I've heard that early detection is the best cure for cancer. Is there some way to just scan me from head to toe to make sure there's nothing brewing? No aneurysms, no tumors, nothing hiding out in there? I think that would give me a little more peace of mind." "Steve, I understand what you're saying, but I think you might be better served seeing my friends over at the Integrative Medicine Center across town. They specialize in utilizing the latest technology to provide preventative care to patients who are, how should we say, unencumbered by traditional insurance limitations," Dr. Clark said. "Does that mean they only take cash?" Steve asked. "I believe they also accept checks, Steve," Dr. Clark said, smiling. "Would they be able to pick up an aneurysm?" "In most cases, yes." "How about a small tumor?" "Yes, they would generally see that." "This sounds like exactly what I'm looking for, Doc." "Steve, you should know these tests aren't perfect." "What do you mean? Didn't you just say they could tell me if I had a tumor or a blood vessel about to burst?" "There was a large study done some years ago to determine whether or not full body MRI scans on healthy individuals were helpful. The initial thought was that many lives would be saved. Did that end up being the case?" Steve asked. "A few lives were saved." "Then why isn't it done more widely, Doc?" "Because of what we call incidentaloma, Steve." "What's an incidentaloma? It sounds like a type of cancer." Incidentaloma, Steve, is medical slang for an incidental finding that no one is quite sure what to do with. They can cause a ton of unneeded worry, confusion, and sometimes result in harm. Say, for instance, we do a full body MRI on you, and the radiologist sees a shadow on your liver. Now we've found something, we're obligated to act. A liver biopsy might be required to make a firm diagnosis. Now, say the doctor doing the biopsy puts the needle in the wrong place and you hemorrhage and die. You've just been killed by an incidentaloma, Dr. Clark said. Chapter 6. An emerald green lawn surrounded the circular two-story brick building housing the imaging center. The shape of the building reminded Steve of the ball bearings which had consumed so much of his life. "Hello, welcome to Slodum Imaging," The receptionist, a blonde woman with red, horn-rimmed glasses, said to Steve as he entered the building through the automatic sliding doors. "Good day," Steve replied. "What type of imaging test are you having done today?" "An MRI. There's nothing wrong with me. I mean, nothing that I know about yet. I'm just having the scan done as part of a preventative medical workup." "Ah, you must have been sent over by Integrative Medical. We see a lot of their patients. Do you have any form of identification so I can look you up in the computer?" "Will my license work?" Steve said as he pulled out the tattered wallet he had carried since high school. "Yes, there you are. Okay, Mr. Jensen. Will you be paying with check, cash, or card today?" "Card, I guess." Steve handed the receptionist his bank card, and after a moment, she returned it to him. "You're all clear, Mr. Jensen. Just follow me. I'll take you back to the changing room," the receptionist said, handing Steve the receipt which had emerged from the printer on her desk. The sunlight in the hallway was tinted by the gray panes of glass lining the walls and ceiling of the building. The floors were lined with a plush red fabric that Steve felt his feet sinking into with every step. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers all along the hallway. Steve followed the receptionist to a door, and she gestured to him to enter. "Here's the dressing room. You'll find some PJs in the cabinet to your left. Change into them and leave your clothes and all valuables in the locker to your right. You must place anything with metal into that bag," she said, holding a small key attached to a plastic tab out toward Steve. Steve looked at the bright blue pajama tops hanging on the door inside the room. "Stylish," she said. The receptionist smiled. "Andrea will be here to get you in just a moment," she said before leaving Steve alone in the dressing room. He closed the door and changed into the cotton pajamas. A few minutes later, a female voice spoke softly from just outside the door. "Mr. Jensen, are you ready?" "1 minute," Steve replied. He straightened the blue fleece top and bottom of the pajamas and noticed there were no metal buttons or fasteners on the PJs. He opened the door to see a tall woman with bright blue eyes and black scrubs standing before him. "Hi, Mr. Jensen. My name is Andrea, and I'll be doing your MRI today. Are you claustrophobic?" "No, not the last time I checked." "The MRI scan requires you to lie in an enclosed space for an extended period of time." "How long are you talking?" "Around 90 minutes. Can I watch a movie while I'm in there?" "Unfortunately, no. We don't have a video screen in our scanner. There is music, though," she said as they walked away from the dressing room. Eventually, they came to a white door beneath red block letters on its outside warning against bringing any metal objects into the room. "What would happen if you, say, accidentally brought a metal object in here?" Steve said, looking at the sign. "Depends what it was. The magnet on the MRI machine is strong enough to turn a metal oxygen tank into a ballistic missile. If it were something small like a ring, it might just get very hot and scald your skin." "Very reassuring," Steve said. "Don't worry, I always triple check," Andrea said as she waved a handheld metal detector over Steve. "The other thing we watch out for is metal implants. If they were put in greater than 20 years ago, they could heat up the magnetic field and burn a patient from the inside out." "Could I have a metal implant and not know it?" Steve said, smiling, but not quite as widely as he had smiled before. Andrea had already walked through the door that led into the room with the MRI machine. It was a 12-foot high monolithic semicircular structure. Protruding out of its center into the room was a sliding exam table. Andrea pressed a button on the wall, and the table whirred and began to move out of the hole in the middle of the MRI machine. "Just hop up on the table, lay back, and make yourself comfortable," she said. Steve climbed onto the table and reclined back onto the soft plastic fabric. Andrea stood on one side of the table and reached over him, pulling a Velcro strap across his chest. Then Andrea clipped a plastic mask that reminded Steve of the kind worn by hockey goalies over his face. This stuff helps to make sure the positioning is accurate when the scan is done, Andrea said. A small mirror was attached to the interior of the plastic mask just over his eyes. It was angled to allow him to see his toes without him having to move his head. Steve's heart sunk as he came to the realization that this would be his view for the next 90 minutes. Andrea stood above him, making the final adjustments to the straps in the plastic mask. She pressed a small squeeze bulb into his hand. If for any reason you need me, just squeeze this. I can hear anything you say over the intercom. How often do people end up needing to squeeze the bulb? Steve asked. It happens more frequently than you would think, so don't feel bad if you need to. I'll be right there on the other side of that glass partition. Andrea turned and pushed a button on the side of the wall as she left the room. The table Steve was lying on began to slide backward into the scanner. The mirror above his eyes was close enough that if he exhaled forcefully, his breath left a layer of condensation on its surface. The diameter of the tube seemed just a few inches larger than his body, and he realized why Andrea had made sure he wasn't claustrophobic. After the table had retracted completely into the scanner, Steve heard a loud thudding sound begin to emerge from deep within the machine. To Steve, it sounded like there was some angry dwarf trapped inside with a sledgehammer trying to break out of the MRI machine. He closed his eyes and waited for the promised music to begin, but he heard only continued banging, interrupted every now and again by a high-pitched whirring from within the MRI machine as the powerful magnets pulsated. He opened his eyes and looked at his feet in the mirror positioned above his face. Then he remembered the ring. It had been his grandfather's. Steve had worn it on his right hand almost every day since his grandfather had died 2 decades earlier. He'd forgotten to take it off in the changing room. He couldn't move his head to look at the ring, but did his right hand feel warmer than his left? How had Andrea not noticed the ring before he'd gotten into the scanner? Why hadn't it set off the metal detector she'd been using? So much for her triple check, Steve thought. He squeezed the bulb Andre had placed in his right hand, and almost instantaneously her voice emerged from a speaker somewhere above him. Are you okay, Steve? She asked. Yes, so far. But I just realized I forgot to take off the ring I was wearing on my right hand. I saw it, Steve. It's platinum. That's one of the non-reactive metals which are safe in the MRI. Oh, yeah, I knew that. I was just testing you, Andrea. Great work. Anything else you need, Steve? Actually, I was wondering if the music was still going to come on. Oh, yes, I'm so sorry, Steve. I completely forgot. Give me a minute and you should hear it start to play, Andrea said. Thanks, Steve replied. The banging within the scanner started again, and the table began to move back and forth in and out of the machine. Then Steve felt the familiar lump beginning to form within his throat, at first making it difficult to swallow, then making it hard for him to inhale and fill his lungs. Not again, he thought, not now. He closed his eyes and pictured the mountain lake from his childhood, while the MRI whirred loudly around him. Chapter 7. 2 weeks later, Dr. Clark sat in his office, going through the various communications regarding his patients which he had received that day. He saw Steve Jensen's name listed in the image report folder and double-clicked the file. Imaging report, scan type, MRI, brain, orbits, neck, abdomen, pelvis. HPI, healthy 50-year-old male, asymptomatic. Impression, normal brain, neck, chest, abdomen, and pelvis. No evidence of neoplastic disease. MRI angiography shows no evidence of arteriovenous malformation. Slight bulging disc noted at C5, C6. Normal pancreas, stomach, liver, aorta, kidneys, bladder, and prostate, all within normal limits. Dr. Clark picked up his phone and began to call Steve's number. He enjoyed the chance to give a patient good news. He was surprised when a woman's voice answered instead of Steve's. Hello? Hi, this is Dr. Clark. I was looking for Steve Jensen. Is this the wrong number? No, no, this is Steve's sister, Marjorie. Hi, Marjorie. Would you be able to let Steve know I've got the results of his MRI back? No, actually, I'm afraid I won't, Marjorie said. Is there another number I should call? Is this a bad time? I know Steve will be anxious to hear the results. I don't think that will be possible. What do you mean? Steve, Steve died yesterday, Marjorie said. What? What do you mean? What happened? Did Steve ever tell you how much he loved to golf? No, he never mentioned it during his office visits. He did. He loved it. It was his greatest passion, besides his business. Last year, he bought a mansion overlooking the 18th green at Pine Canyon. He was sitting on his balcony yesterday when he was struck in the head by a golf ball. That's horrible, the doctor said. They don't think it was actually the golf ball that killed him. It probably just knocked him unconscious. They think it was the piece of steak in his mouth at the time, which lodged in his windpipe and suffocated him. I'm sorry to hear that, Marjorie. To think I was just calling to tell him that his scan showed he was perfectly healthy. Can you think of anything worse, doctor? Pardon me? Can you think of anything worse? Anything worse than dying, Marjorie? Anything worse than dying healthy?